So thank you for joining today. So the first thing I want to talk about is when AI goes wrong, it tends to go pretty badly wrong. So this was a case that is not public, but I wanted to share it with you that a company deployed Copilot, and this was an AXX listed company with 9,000 staff. And so they made a decision to give Copilot to everyone. So when they did that, what they forgot to consider as part of their governance is what Copilot would have access to. And what they found out pretty quickly was that people could ask Copilot what their coworker was earning, what the CEO was earning, and what their boss was earning. So not only was it embarrassing, it creates a legal minefield around privacy and disharmony in the workplace, and a huge amount of remediation was needed by HR. That was a simple, let's just switch it on and let everybody use it, but without thinking through all the things that I'll take you through today. This one was only a few months ago in April when an agentic AI solution went rogue and deleted the entire customer database. So this was a car rental company. And so when people got up in the morning, because it happened overnight, they couldn't log in, they couldn't see the reservations, they couldn't check cars in, couldn't check cars out. And it just did what it wanted to do, which was delete not only the production database, but all the backups as well. And you might have heard the Commonwealth Bank in 2025 rolled out AI, made 45 people redundant, but one of the unintended consequences of that was that call volumes actually rose. They were meant to reduce, and so Commonwealth Bank embarrassingly had to rehire all the people back that they let go. So there's a range of consequences for when things go wrong, but they tend to go wrong pretty badly. So this is why the regulators are twitchy, because they're seeing these things happening to companies, to consumers across the economy. And so this has sent a letter in April to all of their companies they regulate, saying that they're expecting them to establish governance arrangements. ASIC has told companies, do not wait for perfect clarity because these new models are much more powerful than the ones that have come before, and the risks are increasing significantly. The Australian Signals Directorate urges organisations to consider this as not a IT problem. It's a top-level business issue now. And the Five Eyes, which is a collaboration across 5 different countries, is urging corporates and government leaders to take action on cyber risk because the models are more powerful, that they can break into systems much more quickly and easily. And in about 2 weeks, the EU Act starts. So this means that companies will need to be transparent about their AI use, and any vendors will have to provide a lot more information about how their systems are operating in those countries. And of course, the Privacy Act is coming in December. I'm calling that Disclosure Day. So from the 10th of December, if you are using AI or a system that makes a decision that can affect an individual, the rules have changed around that. The Privacy Act is really focusing on black box systems and the inability for companies to explain, hey, you've been rejected for that job application, but we don't know how. They're really concerned about companies letting AI take over a function without having the human review and the management accountability for it. And they want to be confident about how individual data is being used by companies in order to make decisions that are being either fully automated or partially automated by a computer system. So the couple of big things in red there is the fines are going to be significant, and they're taking this seriously. So if you've got an outdated privacy policy and you are the subject of a complaint or an investigation, you could be fined up to $330,000. And if you have a non-serious privacy breach, the fines can go up to $660,000. So they're pretty serious about enforcement, and they'll be far more aggressive from next year. So where would you find AI? I put together a list of systems here that could help you understand the high-risk use cases that could affect people. So, for example, invoice processing, HR applicant screening, allocating employee shifts. When a computer takes over some of these functions, it's really, really important that you have a human in the loop that's helping ensure that the system is being managed responsibly and that it's fully audible, fully transparent, and you can explain it. In the blue section, there are some high risk examples of where you'll find AI or systems that make decisions from a machine perspective. Down the bottom, you've got obviously your large language models like ChatGPT and Claude and so on, Copilot, and vendors with AI modules. And on the bottom right, you've got ungoverned AI where people are using some of these publicly available tools, but not having regard for privacy, security, and all those key things that we really need to make sure that they are taking seriously, which would protect the organisation. So the challenge from next year is that you will need to be able to defend how your systems are operating and be able to explain them, audit them, and be transparent about how they're being used. The biggest challenge I find is that people are putting AI on top of systems that have been accumulating years of documents everywhere, data everywhere, poor business processes, aging systems, and a lot of knowledge contained inside people's heads. So that was the example that I mentioned with that ASX listed company that they exposed payroll data during a Copilot implementation because the payroll team were probably dropping payroll data into a SharePoint file somewhere. That file was then exposed as part of the Copilot implementation, and then people were able to access that data without authorization. That's a common framework that I'm seeing right across the companies that I've been working with. So we've really got a perfect storm. And this is why the regulators are getting twitchy, because we've got these legacy technical environments that have been accumulating over years with a whole range of different systems at different levels of maturity and capability. We're adding new AI solutions on top of that, and these solutions can think for themselves. And then we've got this patchwork of emerging regulations. So I'm thinking what's going to happen with this new Office of the AI out of Canberra is that we'll start centralising a lot of this regulation and have one way of data centres working and one way of regulating AI use across the economy. I think the beginning of regulation. So why is a standard needed? So you might have heard of the construction code, which is used by all the builders across Australia, both for residential and commercial properties. You will have heard of Prince 2, which is a project management framework, and now you've heard of the Australian Government AI Technical Standards. So these are all a set of standards. And why do we need those standards? So to give you a simple example, in a construction context, building a house, you want your house to be built with a minimum standard of quality. That way you can be assured or satisfied that when you move in, that your house won't fall over in high winds. The roof won't leak when it rains. It's comfortable to live in. The toilets work properly. It's low energy to run. And if you've got a balcony, and you probably do in Perth there, which you can look over the ocean, you want that balcony to be safe. So it's all around safety and making sure that whatever's been built is fit for purpose. And if you look on the left-hand side there, you can see that this is one table of contents from the construction code. It's many hundreds of pages long in terms of the standards that the builders have to follow to build a house that complies with code. So the Australian government has developed a standard that will also keep us safe if we are deploying AI systems. So it was developed in 2025, was when it was published. And now with the key definition of an AI system is a computer system that generates outputs that are predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions. So although I'm calling this an AI governance standard, it's really a governance standard for any machine that generates outputs that are predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions. I was working with invoice processing automation tools over 10 years ago, which had the ability to make decisions about what to do with a particular invoice. So this just doesn't capture AI systems. There will be a lot of systems that IT teams are using or have implemented which will fall under the umbrella here. So the Australian Public Service is using this standard now. It's mandated. It's part of their responsible use of AI. They've also, through their procurement contracts, ensured that some of their suppliers adopt this standard, and also some consultants, particularly those like the Big Four. And we've all heard about, they've been leading the way on how not to do AI. And you would have heard about all of those stories already. So what they've also said is strong recommendations for state government, local government, anyone who's funded by federal government and corporates to adopt a standard. So I'll take you through how the standard works. So there are 42 statements in the standard. Within each statement, there is criteria, and I'll give you some examples in a moment. Of the 148 criteria, 91 of them are mandatory across the whole AI lifecycle. So the 42 statements are broken up across whole of life and 3 phases. There's discovery, operate, and retire. So under the whole of life, there are 8 statements. Defining your operating model, which is really how you deploy systems, how are things approved, what is your governance structures inside your organization, the architecture, your people, auditing, explaining bias versions and watermarks. That applies to the whole life cycle of a system. Below that, we've got the 3 phases, and there you've got your individual stages: design, data, train, evaluate, etc. Within each of those stages, there are statements. So under the design stage, for example, the 4 statements that apply here are: you have to define your problem, you have to take a human-centered approach, you have to design for safety, and you have to define your success criteria up front. So those are pretty standard things that anybody who's worked in IT or systems before that's part and parcel of deploying a system generally. And that's what I like about this particular standard. It applies AI using a very well-known or well-understood way of working in IT systems. Every IT system I've ever put in, we've always had to define the problem up front. But this gives an AI lens to that. So, for example, under statement 4, one of the whole of life statements, to enable AI auditing, it provides a criteria, which is end-to-end auditability of the system. And then it provides the guidance for that, so that you've got a good reference point for understanding what does it mean for a system to be auditable. So up here, we've got auditing here as a whole of life statement, and here's the criteria that you need to follow in order to fulfill the requirements of having an auditable system for AI purposes. Under the terms of explainability, which is a critical one also for the new privacy rules that are coming in, again, it provides all the guidance you need in order to make sure that your systems are fully explainable. So for comparing the framework to project management tools like Prince2, you can see that they both follow the system lifecycle: your pre-project phases, initiation, subsequent stages, and your final stage of a project. The only difference between the governance framework and Prince2, the governance framework considers that critical phase of what happens once you go live. And that is, how do you monitor your systems to make sure that they don't drift, that they're achieving their original intent, and that you are not causing any unintended consequence. So the monitoring phase is pretty critical in the standard. And then you've got a decommission phase. Now, why the decommission phase is critical is because in Prince2, you don't really consider decommissioning a system, you close the project. But from a governance perspective, one of the things companies are finding now is they need to have a kill switch. They need to shut the system down and revert business continuity plans or whatever they need to do if that system fails significantly. So the good thing about the governance framework is that you design up front what happens if something goes wrong, so you can decommission the system and revert back to an alternative process if things go wrong. And when I mentioned that rogue AI agent that went bad in the UK for a car rental agency, they didn't think about what would happen if things go wrong, and they didn't put any guardrails around what that agent could and could not do. So not only did it delete production, it deleted all the backups. And that's a failing of human governance, not of the AI. Unfortunately, AI gets blamed a lot, but it can only do what it's been allowed to do. And in this situation, it was given too much freedom, and good governance would have thought about that well before they went live. So the ISO 42001 framework, that's more around auditing and assessing your AI systems, not implementing them as what the DTA framework does. So they've got different purposes, and the ISO 42001, very useful for assessing where are we now. But if I was putting in an AI solution, then the DTA framework provides really good guidance on best practice to put that system in properly. So you also meet the requirements of ISO 42001. So Copilot, there's been a lot of press about people using that in an ungoverned way. So on the left-hand side, if your company just turns it on, so what happened in the UK, in the Midlands Police Department, they switched on Copilot without a policy, without any guidelines, and people could just use it how they wanted to use it. It turns out that they were putting sensitive data into Copilot for court cases, and it was also hallucinating. So some of the information it was giving back that the police were presenting in court was found to be incorrect. And the chief commissioner over there of police ended up losing their job over that. So on the left-hand side is all the things that could go wrong. And the right-hand side is if you adopted the governance standard, you would then cover off on a lot of those things. You would not have any problems down the track because you've applied good governance over the top. I don't know how many people I speak to on the street who tell me that their IT department just switched on Copilot and just let them use it. And that's a little bit scary. So taking that one step further, a lot of you in the cybersecurity space will know that if you do have multiple layers of defense against a cyber attack, it will help prevent those attacks. And the same thing happens with governance. The more that you can implement around the system, the more layers you have to prevent things going wrong. So in this case, the HR system is fully auditable. So that helped, find a problem before it became a major problem. Marketing systems were designed around humans. The finance system could explain its outputs, but Copilot couldn't do any of that. And that's when you have the big failures. So here's some quick wins. I'll send you this list of the 42 statements. Here's 6 of them that you can start implementing now. I won't go into those in too much detail, but this is something that's pretty important. So when I work with companies to help them conceptualize, what they need to be worried about, if you think of a situation where something goes wrong, then this framework helps you unpack it. Do we know what the system was authorized to do? What data did it use? How did it behave? What records do we have? Who is responsible? Can we quickly resolve it? And can we shut it down? Just 7 simple questions. You would then start questioning, could we actually answer those questions? And that's what AI governance is really all about. So, we talked about the Privacy Act coming in December. So if you're barely using AI officially, we've got the voluntary AI safety standards already in place. If you follow those, it might be enough. What I'm seeing is most companies are doing more than just nothing. They're starting to use it. So you just need to think about how to be vigilant, and can you follow the chain of pain if something goes wrong? As you use it more broadly, and like I said, people switch on Copilot for 9,000 staff, what could possibly go wrong? So the more that you use AI, the greater your exposure risk inside the company. And that's where you need some governance around it. The other thing I haven't mentioned here is shadow AI. You don't know what people are doing outside of the company with company data, including putting board level information into these tools or staff using them for medical records. There's a whole bunch of use cases where people have been inappropriately using publicly available free tools, which are sometimes incorrect. But when you do use them and you don't use them appropriately, that data you're putting in goes back into the model for training purposes. It then gets exposed elsewhere to someone else who is then doing some research on the same topic. So here's a good takeaway for you. Here's 5 steps. I won't go through the steps now because you can do them in your own time. The number one thing I recommend is identifying an AI system owner for every system, and that person is solely responsible for the outcomes of that solution. That would be pretty important. If you could do that now, that's a fairly straightforward thing to do. Um, and number four, implement auditing. You could do that within a month, and then that would mean that if you are using AI systems, you can audit them. You're one step ahead if you can do that. So that would be a couple of things I'd recommend doing straight away. I'll give you a copy of the standard as part of the information I send out after this session. But I think overall, doing nothing is no longer an option. You've got this exposure risk for AI privacy or data breach. I've mentioned the fines. If the regulators come in, you've got potential for reputational damage, personal legal liability for directors. You can lose your customers, you can lose your employees, as the ASX listed company did, and you've got obviously the disruption that's caused. So what does good governance look like? At a minimum, having some sort of framework in place, whether it's ISO 42001 or the Australian standard, it's having something in place at a minimum, establishing that ownership and accountability that I mentioned earlier across the life cycle of a system so that someone is named and potentially shamed if things go wrong. There has to be skin in the game because the world has changed. These systems evolve. They think for themselves. You can't go to the court and say, well, the AI did it, because that's no longer an acceptable excuse. The human has to be in the loop and has to be responsible. You need to build an inventory of AI tools that you use and AI use cases, and this will grow as organizations get comfortable, more mature, but Copilot would be one of those that you need to have documented how you're using it, what use cases you're using it for. And then you can assess each of those use cases in terms of risk and what could possibly go wrong. And human in the loop is that fourth point, ensuring that, that trade-off between automation versus human. So I did a project a year or two ago where we automated the scanning of invoices, automated the routing of those to managers. And once the manager approved it, we automated the payment. So this organisation had 180 sites. We were processing 50,000 invoices, $82 million spend. We went from, having people across 180 sites keying invoices into the machine doing the keying. The machine then routed them for approval. And then once they were approved, then they got paid. The biggest challenge that we found with that whole process was that the people who were doing the data entry suddenly had to become the human in the loop and review the decisions the machine was making. And that was a whole different way of thinking for people who were just happy to key in invoices. So we did have a lot of challenges around that change of role. And what we wanted to do was to move people from, hey, you're just keying in invoices, to, why are we doing that spend? Could we optimize that spend? Why are we using that supplier? If we've got $82 million worth of spend, how do we get our arms around that and make sure that spend is the best value for money? So we wanted to try to shift the organization from just processing invoices to, let's look at our spend and optimize it. And that was a complete flip. So there are some of the things that you'll come across as you automate as the world has changed. So educating staff, again, is not a one-off thing. It's something that has to happen continuously. It's almost like going to church on every Sunday. It's every meeting, every quarter, every time that you interact with people. It's really just to reinforce that the humans are responsible and that what do we need to learn? What do we need training on? How can we upskill our people to make sure that we can maximize the benefits of this technology, but also maximize the human potential around discernment, judgment, ensuring that we don't misuse the technology and we bring in those human skills, which will be more important than ever. So it's not a case of just automate it and forget about it. There are so many opportunities for people to work with this technology, but they'll need the training and support to move them from where they are today. So what do we do? So we help organisations be ready for Disclosure Day for the Privacy Act, which is coming up in December. We've got some tools that we can identify shadow AI and understand what risks that might present to your organization. We do ISO 42001 audits and risk assessments, AI governance educations and workshops, and we do offer fractional AI governance offices. That's a little bit about services that we provide. I think the lesson learned is from all the failures that we're seeing is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And a lot of organizations don't do anything around AI governance until they've had an incident, something has gone wrong. So part of what I'm trying to do is to share, what could possibly go wrong and how could you prevent that by even just putting some very simple steps in place now to make sure that you keep your system safe and secure. So one of the things that I'm really keen to work with companies on at the moment is shadow AI discovery. We've got some new tools which are quite exciting. A digital avatar, and the avatar has a human-like conversation with that person and explores how they're using AI, what are the use cases, what tools are they using, when are they doing it, what are the situations in which they're using it. And it gives you a really rich view of what people are doing that you may not be aware of. So I'm really looking for somebody to work with on that and to show how valuable getting that information from people is so that you can prevent the AI risks that I've talked about, but also then you can harness that information to providing an AI service that delivers that, but a secure, responsible and safe way without people using shadow AI. Thank you for joining me. Thanks everyone. I'll close the call now.